Emma Lawson woke up that morning with the sound of heavy rain still echoing in her ears. The storm had passed during the night, but its signs were still everywhere: wet grass, muddy paths, and the distant roar of the river that flowed behind the small farming village. Emma had lived alone for the past 2 years, and mornings like these always reminded her of the challenges she faced without anyone by her side. Still, she was strong, and she had learned to push forward even when sadness tried to slow her down. She needed to deliver some vegetables to a neighbor that morning, which meant taking the old path that ran near the river. Emma knew the storm might have made the bridge weaker, but she had crossed it many times before. The village had only a few simple wooden bridges, and everyone who lived there trusted them. She wrapped her shawl around herself, tied her hair back, and stepped out into the fresh, cool air. The world felt washed clean, as if the rain had taken away all dust and noise. Emma walked with steady steps, but her mind wandered. She thought about her quiet life, her small farm, and the long days she spent working alone. Some days were peaceful, but others felt too silent. Even though she never said it aloud, she missed the feeling of having someone nearby. She missed the sound of another person's footsteps walking with her. She missed the warmth of a voice that wasn't her own. But life had changed, and she had learned to accept things as they were. As she approached the river, she noticed that the water looked different today. It moved faster, swirling like it carried a hidden strength. The storm had filled it beyond its usual level, and the water slapped hard against the rocks. Emma paused at the edge of the wooden bridge and examined it. One side looked crooked, but she believed it would still hold her weight. People in the village had crossed weaker bridges many times without problems. Taking a quiet breath, she stepped forward. The first few planks felt steady. She held her basket close and moved slowly, trying not to slip. But halfway across, she felt something shift beneath her. Before she could react, the wood cracked loudly. Emma gasped and reached out to grab the railing, but it snapped the moment her hand touched it. In an instant, her foot slipped, and she lost her balance. Her body tilted forward, and the rushing water beneath her seemed to open like a wide mouth ready to swallow her. She fell into the river with a sharp cry. The cold water hit her like a wall, shocking her entire body. The current pulled her down, spinning her around as if she were a leaf caught in a storm. Emma kicked hard, desperate to rise above the surface. When her head finally broke through the water, she tried to scream for help, but her voice was weak and swallowed by the sound of the river. The current dragged her farther from the bridge, pushing her toward deeper water. For a moment, Emma thought she might not make it. She tried to stay calm, but her breath came in short, panicked bursts. She felt her strength slipping away. She reached for a floating branch, but the current ripped it from her fingers. Water splashed into her mouth, and she coughed, choking as she struggled to remain afloat. Her mind raced with memories she hadn't thought of in months, moments from her past, the face of her late husband, the nights she cried herself to sleep, and the mornings she forced herself to be strong. She didn't want her life to end here, in this cold river, without anyone knowing what happened to her. But as her energy faded, Emma saw something moving on the riverbank. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then she saw it clearly. A man running toward the water, his boots splashing mud behind him. He was tall, wearing a dark hat and a worn jacket that marked him as a cowboy or ranch worker. She didn't know him, but at that moment, he was the only hope she had left. Luke Carter had been riding through the area when he noticed something strange. A hat was floating in the water, spinning in circles near the river's edge. Luke stopped his horse immediately, sensing something was wrong. People didn't just drop hats in the river for no reason. When he spotted Emma being pushed down the stream, his heart jumped. He didn't think twice. He threw his horse's reins over a branch and sprinted toward her with full force. Luke didn't hesitate. Without removing his boots or jacket, he dove into the rushing river. The water was colder than he expected, but he pushed through it, fighting against the strong current as he swam toward Emma. She was struggling to stay above the water, her arms flapping weakly as if she had no strength left. Luke called out to her, his voice loud and firm, but Emma was too disoriented to understand his words. The current kept pushing them apart, but Luke was strong and determined. He used every bit of strength he had, pushing against the river to reach her. When he finally got close enough, he grabbed her arm, but the current pulled her away again. He tried once more, stretching his hand as far as he could, and Emma reached back with the last bit of strength she had left. Their hands locked, and Luke pulled her toward him with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of both of them. Emma clung to him, her breath shaking, her clothes heavy with water. Luke wrapped one arm around her, keeping her head above the surface as he swam toward the riverbank. Every movement was a battle. The river fought them with every push. But Luke didn't give up. He kept going, step by step, until his feet finally reached the muddy bottom near the edge. Using all his remaining strength, he lifted Emma and dragged her out of the water. They reached the grass, both gasping for air. Emma's entire body trembled from shock and cold. She tried to speak but could barely form a word. Luke knelt beside her, breathing hard, trying to steady himself. He looked at her carefully, her pale face, wet hair, and frightened eyes. Though they were strangers, he felt a strange sense of responsibility for her safety. Emma attempted to sit up, but fell back almost immediately. Her legs were too weak, and her whole body felt drained. Luke gently placed a hand on her shoulder and told her to rest. His voice was calm, steady, and comforting. He didn't ask questions yet. He knew she needed time to breathe. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the sound of the river behind them calming down now that the danger had passed. Emma looked at Luke with gratitude, though her lips trembled too much to speak. Luke gave her a reassuring nod, letting her know she was safe. But when a cold wind blew across the riverbank, Emma's body shivered violently. Luke realized she needed warmth immediately. Without wasting time, he lifted her carefully into his arms. Emma didn't resist. She was too exhausted, and a strange sense of trust had already formed between them. Luke stood up with her and began walking toward his cabin nearby, hoping the warmth inside would help her recover. The river had almost taken her life, but fate had placed the right person in the right place at the right moment. And neither of them knew that this unexpected meeting, born from danger and fear, would soon change both of their lives in ways they had never imagined. Luke carried Emma in his arms as he walked toward his cabin, which sat quietly near the open pasture. The rain had softened the ground, and each step he took left a deep footprint behind him. Emma's clothes were completely soaked, and the cold had entered her bones. She tried to keep her eyes open, but everything around her felt blurry. The world seemed to spin, and only the steady sound of Luke's heartbeat near her ear kept her from slipping into complete weakness. Luke tightened his grip just a little, making sure she felt secure. He wasn't a man who talked much, but he understood the weight of silence. Emma didn't speak either, but her breathing and small trembles told him everything he needed to know. She was cold, afraid, and trying her best to stay conscious. The cabin wasn't far, but the path felt longer because of the soft earth and Emma's fragile state. When Luke finally reached the door, he pushed it open with his boot and stepped inside. The cabin was simple: a small room with wooden walls, a fireplace, a table, and a bed in the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, dry, and safe. The moment the door closed, the wind outside faded, and a peaceful stillness filled the room. Luke gently set Emma down on the chair closest to the fireplace. Her body leaned forward slightly, and she held the edges of the chair as if it were her anchor. Her lips were pale, and her hands shook as she tried to remove her wet shawl, but her fingers were too numb. Without saying a word, Luke knelt beside the fireplace and began placing dry wood into it. He struck a match, and soon a warm flame flickered to life. The fire grew slowly, filling the room with a soft orange light. Emma watched him, shivering even though the warmth was beginning to spread. Luke looked back at her. "You're freezing," he said in a calm and gentle tone. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you fall sick." Emma knew he was right, but the idea of being alone in a stranger's cabin, weak and shaken, made her nervous. She looked around slowly. There was no one else there, just the two of them. Luke stood with respect, keeping a distance, his eyes focused on the fire rather than on her. He turned away politely, giving her space. "I can step outside for a minute," he said. "You can call me when you're ready." Emma swallowed hard. The thought of being alone again, even for a minute, made her chest tighten. The memory of the river pulling her under rushed through her mind, and she felt the same fear all over again. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Please don't go," she whispered. Luke paused near the door, surprised by the softness of her request. He turned slightly, keeping his eyes on the floor so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She was trembling hard now, not just from cold, but from fear. He didn't want her to feel abandoned. "I won't leave," he said quietly, "but I'll stay by the door facing away. You'll have your space." Emma nodded, relieved. She trusted his voice more than she expected. There was something steady and safe in the way he talked, a calmness she hadn't felt around anyone in a long time. She looked down at her wet dress and felt embarrassed. She didn't want to say the words, but she needed him to understand. Her voice was small as she spoke again. "Will you stay if I undress?" she asked, her cheeks warming with the blush of worry. Luke did not misunderstand her. He turned his back immediately, giving her complete privacy. His voice was steady and respectful. "I won't look. You're safe here," he assured her. Emma took a slow breath. She knew he meant every word. She had met enough people in her life to understand the difference between danger and kindness, and Luke's behavior showed only respect and concern. With his back turned, Emma carefully peeled off her heavy wet dress. It clung to her skin, making it difficult to remove, but she pushed through the discomfort. Each movement made her shiver harder. She felt exposed, not because of her clothes, but because she was vulnerable in front of someone she barely knew. Luke stood completely still, facing the door, his hat lowered slightly. He didn't move or turn, not even once. He understood her fear, and didn't want to make her feel any more uncomfortable than she already was. Emma wrapped herself in the large blanket he had placed near the chair. The soft fabric immediately brought warmth to her body, and the trembling slowly began to fade. She let out a shaky breath of relief. "I'm done," she whispered quietly. Luke turned around slowly, keeping his eyes on her face and nowhere else. He noticed the improvement in her color. Her cheeks had a slight warmth again, though she still looked fragile. He approached the fireplace and adjusted the logs so the fire would grow stronger. The cabin filled with a comforting heat. Emma held the blanket tightly around herself, watching Luke as he moved quietly. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, and he didn't show any impatience. Everything he did with care, as if he understood exactly what she needed at that moment. "Are you feeling a little better?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said, her voice still fragile. "Thank you for not leaving." Luke nodded. "You've been through a lot. No one should be alone after something like that." He walked to the kitchen shelf and took out a kettle. He filled it with water and placed it over the fire. The sound of the metal warming slowly joined the crackling of the wood, adding a peaceful rhythm to the room. Emma watched him closely. She had seen many people in her life, but very few had this kind of quiet, natural kindness. Luke didn't treat her like a burden or like someone he rescued for praise. He simply acted because it was the right thing to do. Her voice softened. You saved my life. Luke shook his head lightly. I was just nearby. Anyone would have done the same. Emma knew that wasn't true. Many people might have passed by without noticing or without risking their own safety. But Luke had jumped in without hesitation, without thinking of himself. She didn't argue, but inside her heart, she held a deep gratitude. The kettle began to steam, and Luke poured hot water into a cup, dropping in a few leaves of simple tea. He brought it to Emma, careful not to spill. Drink this. It'll warm you up, he said. Emma accepted it with both hands. The cup's warmth seeped into her fingers, relaxing them. She took a slow sip. The taste was mild but soothing, like comfort in liquid form. Luke pulled up a chair across from her but kept a respectful distance. He rested his arms on his knees and watched her quietly, making sure she didn't faint or fall asleep too soon. For the first time since the river, Emma felt herself breathe normally again. The fire warmed her, the tea calmed her, and Luke's presence made her feel unexpectedly safe. She pulled the blanket closer to her chin and whispered, almost as a confession, I was so scared. Luke nodded, his eyes understanding. Anyone would have been, but you're strong. You fought hard. Emma looked at the flames dancing in the fireplace. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was facing the world alone. The fear she felt earlier slowly melted into a quiet sense of comfort. The cabin was small. The moment was simple, but something within Emma shifted quietly. Something that had been locked away since the day she became a widow. She didn't know what it was yet. She only knew that she was no longer trembling, and she was no longer afraid. The river had taken her breath away earlier. But here, in this warm cabin with this kind stranger, she felt like she could breathe again. Emma sat wrapped in the warm blanket, feeling the heat from the fireplace slowly spreading through her body. The shock from the river had begun to fade, leaving behind a tired calmness. Luke sat across from her, quiet as always, his hat resting beside his chair. The cabin felt peaceful, with only the fire crackling softly and the wind rustling outside. Emma had not felt this kind of peace in a long time. Luke did not speak right away. He understood that she needed time to settle, to let her heartbeat return to normal. He kept his eyes on the flames, respecting her space. Every few moments he glanced at her just to make sure she wasn't feeling faint or dizzy. Emma noticed these small, caring gestures, and each one softened the nervousness she had carried inside. After a long stretch of silence, Emma finally took a deep breath. She felt the need to say something, anything, to fill the quiet. I'm sorry, she whispered. Luke looked up. Sorry? For what? For causing trouble, she said, staring at the cup in her hands. You had to save me. You had to bring me here. You're doing so much for someone you don't even know. Luke shook his head gently, leaning back in his chair. That's not trouble, he said. You were in danger. Anyone would have helped. Emma gave a small, tired smile. Not everyone jumps into a river without thinking. Luke did not respond to that. He simply looked down, as if he did not consider his actions anything special. For him, helping someone was just something a decent person should do. But for Emma, who had lived in quiet loneliness for so long, his kindness meant more than he realized. She took another sip of her tea, feeling its warmth soothe her chest. I don't even know your name, she said softly. Luke Carter, he replied. I work at the ranch east of the village. Emma nodded slowly. I've heard of that ranch. People say the workers there wake up before the sun rises. A faint smile appeared on Luke's face. That's true. The animals don't wait. Emma felt her worry loosen even more. His calm voice, steady posture and respectful manner made her feel safe in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She wrapped the blanket closer around herself. "My name is Emma Lawson," she said finally. "I live on a small farm near the orchard." "I know the place," Luke said. "It's quiet out there." "Yes," she replied, her voice lowering. "Very quiet." Luke could hear the loneliness hidden behind those words. He didn't pry or ask questions, but Emma felt a desire to talk, something she usually avoided. Maybe it was the shock of the river, or maybe it was the warmth of the cabin, but she felt her heart opening in a way she hadn't allowed since her husband passed away. "You live alone?" Luke asked gently, giving her the chance to share only if she wanted to. Emma nodded, staring into the fire. "For 2 years now." Luke waited, sensing that more words were coming. "My husband fell ill," she continued quietly. "He was sick for months. I took care of him the best I could, but—" Her voice shook a little. She took a slow breath. "One day, he didn't wake up." Luke's eyes softened with sympathy. He didn't say he was sorry in a rushed way. Instead, he waited a moment and spoke with honesty. "That must have been very hard." Emma felt her throat tighten. Most people gave her quick, uncomfortable condolences, then changed the topic because they didn't know what to say. But Luke's tone held no pity, just understanding. "It was," she whispered. "It still is sometimes." Luke didn't push her to continue, but Emma felt a strange comfort in sharing her story with him. Maybe it was because he had seen her at her weakest that day. Maybe because he had risked his life for her. Or maybe because he didn't treat her like someone broken. "To keep myself busy," Emma said, lifting her gaze. "I do everything on the farm alone. Planting, harvesting, repairing things. I don't have family nearby. People in the village help sometimes, but most days it's just me." Luke nodded slowly. "You're strong," he said. "Stronger than you realize." Emma blinked, surprised by the simple truth in his voice. No one had called her strong in a long time. She had felt tired, worn out, lonely, but never strong. Hearing it from someone who barely knew her made her chest feel warm. "What about you?" she asked softly. "You live alone too?" Luke sat back, resting his hands together. "Pretty much," he said. "I have a little cabin near the ranch. Most days I work from sunrise to sunset. Not many people around to talk to." Emma smiled gently. "So you prefer the quiet life too?" Luke shrugged. "I guess I've gotten used to it." "Used to it," Emma repeated. "That sounds familiar." A quiet moment passed between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just peaceful. It felt like the kind of silence shared by two people who understood each other without needing too many words. Luke leaned forward and adjusted the logs in the fire. "You must be tired," he said. "Shock takes a lot of energy." Emma nodded. "I am tired, but talking helps. I haven't done this in a long time. Talk to someone like this, I mean." Luke looked at her with soft eyes. "You can talk as long as you want. I'm not in a hurry." Emma's heart warmed at those words. It wasn't about having long conversations. It was about being given permission to speak freely without fear of being judged or rushed. She ran her fingers along the blanket, gathering her thoughts. "Do you ever feel," she began slowly, "like life moves forward even when you're not ready?" Luke looked into the fire thoughtfully. "All the time," he said. "Some days it feels like life runs faster than I can keep up with. Other days it feels like it's standing still while I'm trying to move forward." Emma felt an unexpected smile form on her lips. "That's exactly how it feels." The kettle near the fire began to hiss softly again. Luke stood, took it off the heat, and poured more hot water into her cup. Emma watched him with a gentle expression. His movements were calm and careful. He wasn't trying to impress her. He just cared enough to help. "Thank you," she said as he handed her the cup again. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "But I want to," she said softly. "Not everyone treats others with such kindness." Luke didn't respond right away. He simply sat back down, thoughtful. Emma took a slow sip of tea. The warmth spread through her like a quiet embrace. She set the cup down gently. "You saved me from the river," she said, looking at him. "But you're also saving me now." Luke blinked, unsure what she meant. "You're listening," she explained. "You're staying. That means more than you think." Luke's chest tightened with a strange mix of emotion. He wasn't used to hearing such words. Most people saw him as just a ranch worker, someone who did his job and went home. But Emma's words touched something inside him. "You're not alone right now," he said softly. Emma nodded, and for the first time in 2 years, those words felt true. She wasn't alone. Not in the cold river, not in the warm cabin, not in this quiet moment shared between two strangers who suddenly didn't feel like strangers anymore. The fire glowed brighter. The wind outside softened. The world felt smaller, gentler, safer. And Emma realized that this moment, simple, warm, and unexpected, was healing something inside her that she didn't even know needed healing. Emma woke the next morning to the soft crackle of the fireplace and a gentle warmth around her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The wooden ceiling above her, the warm blanket wrapped around her, and the faint smell of burning wood confused her sleepy mind. But then she remembered everything: the bridge, the river, Luke pulling her from the water, and the long, quiet conversation that followed. Her chest filled with a strange mixture of relief and gratitude. She pushed herself up slowly, feeling a little stronger than the night before. The blanket slid down her shoulders, and she realized she was lying on Luke's bed. She looked around the room, surprised. Luke himself was not in sight, but she heard soft footsteps outside the cabin. Emma gathered the blanket around her and stood carefully. She wasn't dizzy now, but her legs still felt slightly weak. She took a deep breath and walked to the window. Luke was outside, feeding his horse and checking the wooden fence that lined the pasture. The early sun cast a soft gold light on him, making the scene look almost peaceful enough to paint. He moved slowly with purpose, like a man used to work but never in a rush. Watching him, Emma felt a calmness she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know how long she stood there, holding the blanket close, just observing his peaceful morning routine. Luke looked up and noticed her through the window. His expression shifted gently, not surprised, not overly excited, just warm, like he was glad to see she was awake. He gave a small nod and she felt her heart soften. She returned the gesture and stepped back from the window. A few minutes later, the door opened softly and Luke walked inside. He brushed mud from his boots before going further into the cabin. He looked at Emma with calm concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "A little tired," she admitted. "But much better than yesterday." Luke nodded. "That's good. You gave me a scare yesterday." Emma smiled in a shy way. "I gave myself a scare too." He glanced toward the fireplace and added more wood. The fire brightened immediately, making the room warmer. Emma watched him, appreciating the way he moved. Quiet, steady, thoughtful. "I didn't mean to end up in your bed," she said softly, clutching the blanket a little tighter. Luke looked over his shoulder and shook his head gently. "You were freezing and exhausted. I only wanted you to rest somewhere warm. I slept in the chair." He motioned to the wooden chair near the fireplace. Emma looked at the chair. A small pillow and folded blanket were placed neatly on it. She felt a wave of gratitude. Luke had given her the warmest spot in the cabin while he slept upright, just to make sure she was comfortable. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he replied simply, "but I wanted to." The honesty in his voice surprised her. It wasn't just kindness. It was sincerity, something deeper than politeness. Emma lowered her gaze, her cheeks warming with a quiet emotion she couldn't name. Luke reached into the cupboard and took out some bread and dried fruit. "You should eat before you try standing too long," he said. "Your body went through a lot." Emma nodded and took a seat by the small table. Luke placed the food in front of her, along with a cup of warm tea he had prepared earlier. She watched him in silence, touched by the way he paid attention to the smallest details. She picked up a piece of bread and smiled. "You really think of everything." Luke shrugged with a small half-smile. "You needed help. I'm just doing what anyone would." Emma looked at him directly. Not everyone would. He didn't argue, but his eyes softened as if her words reached a part of him he rarely let people touch. They ate in comfortable silence. Emma savored every bite, not because the food was fancy, but because she hadn't shared a meal with someone in such a peaceful way for a long time. Each moment felt strangely comforting, like the beginning of something she didn't fully understand. After finishing her meal, she set the cup down and took a deep breath. "Luke," she began, "I want to say something." He looked at her attentively. "I was really scared yesterday," she said slowly. "Not just because of the river, but because I've been alone for so long that I forgot what it feels like to have someone near me when I need them." Luke listened quietly, without interrupting. "When you saved me, and then stayed with me, it meant more than I can explain." Luke leaned back slightly, his voice calm but honest. "No one deserves to face fear alone, Emma. Not ever." She felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from feeling understood. She quickly blinked them away. "I should go home today," she said gently. "The farm won't take care of itself?" Luke nodded, but his expression dimmed slightly. "I figured you'd say that. But I don't think you should go alone. Not yet." Emma tilted her head, curious. "Why?" "You're still tired," Luke said, "and the ground near the river isn't steady. I'll walk you home. I want to make sure you reach safely." Emma felt her heart flutter at his words, not because they were dramatic or romantic, but because they were simple and sincere. She nodded. "I would like that." She gathered her courage and asked, "Can I borrow something to wear until my clothes dry?" Luke smiled slightly. "Of course. I'll find something." He went to the chest near his bed and pulled out a long, soft shirt that would reach her knees. Emma held it with both hands and whispered a small, "Thank you." She stepped behind the wooden divider near the corner to change. Luke respectfully turned his back, giving her complete privacy. When she finished changing, she stepped out wearing the oversized shirt, the blanket still around her shoulders. Luke turned and gave a small nod of approval. "You look warmer now," he said. Emma smiled shyly. "A lot warmer." They stepped outside together, the morning air cool but gentle. Birds were just beginning to chirp in the trees. The world felt fresh, alive, and welcoming. Emma took a slow breath, appreciating the feeling. Luke walked beside her, keeping a close watch on her steps in case she felt weak. They moved at a slow pace, talking about small things, the farm, the ranch, the weather. But beneath those simple words was a quiet connection growing between them. As they reached the spot where the broken bridge lay, Emma stopped and stared. The wood was still cracked, pieces of it hanging dangerously over the fast-moving water. She took a shaky breath as memories of falling rushed back. Luke noticed her expression and stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel supported. "You're safe," he said softly. Emma nodded, though her voice trembled. "I didn't think I'd ever see this place again." "But you did," Luke replied, "because you fought, and you're stronger than you think." Those words steadied her heartbeat. She looked at him with deep gratitude. They crossed the river using a safer path further up, where stepping stones lay beneath the shallow water. Luke stayed close the entire time, making sure she didn't slip. When they finally reached Emma's farm, she paused at the gate. The small house looked peaceful, but it also looked lonelier than she remembered. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Luke gave a gentle nod. "If you ever need help or someone to talk to, I'm not far." Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Meeting Luke had changed something inside her, and she wasn't ready to let that feeling go. The night had a calm and peaceful feel, the kind that made everything seem softer and safer. Emma stood near the kitchen window as Luke finished his dinner and quietly placed his hat on the chair beside him. The warm light from the small lamp on the table spread gently across the room, giving the wooden walls a golden glow. Outside, the moon was rising slowly behind the trees, making the fields shine in a silver shade. Emma felt something new inside her, a mix of nervousness and hope. She wasn't afraid like she had been on the day of the river accident. Tonight she was simply trying to gather enough courage to say something her heart had been holding for days. Luke finished drinking water and stood up to help her collect the dishes, but she shook her head with a small smile. "You helped enough," she said softly. "You always do." Luke gave a shy smile in return. He wasn't a man who talked too much, but he always understood the meaning behind her words. He had become someone she could rely on without thinking twice. Even now, standing in her quiet farmhouse kitchen, he felt like he belonged here more than anywhere else. Emma walked to the doorway, but she didn't open it yet. Her hands gently touched the wooden frame, her fingers trembling slightly. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and nervous, but she knew this moment mattered. Luke noticed her silence. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, though it didn't hide the emotions filling her eyes. She took a deep breath, slow and steady, as if preparing herself. "Luke," she began, her voice soft, "I want to tell you something before you leave." Luke stepped closer, giving her the space she needed, but also showing he was listening with full attention. She looked down for a moment, gathering her courage. "The day you saved me from the river, I asked you something strange because I was frightened. I didn't want to be alone. I felt cold, weak, and scared." Luke nodded silently. He remembered everything, the rushing water, her trembling hands, the fear in her eyes. He had promised to stay close so she wouldn't feel alone. Emma lifted her eyes again, and this time they held warmth instead of fear. "Tonight, I want to ask you something again," she said. "But it's not because I'm scared now." She took another breath and spoke the words carefully, from the deepest place in her heart. "Will you stay? Not because I need help, but because I feel safe with you?" The room became completely still. Luke stood frozen, not from shock, but because her words touched him in a way he hadn't expected. His eyes softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, seeing her bravery, her gentleness, and her honesty. He slowly removed his hat and held it in his hands. For a cowboy like him, taking off his hat in front of someone wasn't just manners, it was respect. It meant he was showing his true self. "Emma," he said quietly, "nobody has asked me something like that before." She waited, her heart beating fast. She didn't know what he would say, but she knew she had finally spoken her truth. Luke stepped closer, his boots making a soft sound on the wooden floor. "I don't stay anywhere unless I feel it in my heart," he said. "But with you, I don't feel like I'm just passing through." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Luke continued, choosing his words carefully. "If you want me here, I'll stay for as long as you want. he said in a steady voice. "I'll stay because I care about you, and because being near you feels right." A soft, relieved smile spread across Emma's face. She had not smiled this way, not this openly, not this honestly, since the day her husband had passed away. Life had been heavy for so long, but tonight something lighter and gentler had entered her home. She stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know how much that means." Luke gave a small smile of his own. "I think I do," he replied. The night breeze came through the slightly open window, carrying the soft scent of the fields. It made the kitchen curtains flutter gently. The moment felt almost magical, simple, but full of meaning. Emma walked back to the table and poured both of them a little more tea. They sat across from each other again, but this time the silence between them wasn't uncertain. It was warm and comforting, like they had both finally found the missing piece they didn't know they needed. They talked for a long while, about small things, about their days, about nothing and everything. They laughed softly. They shared stories that had remained hidden for years. Emma spoke about the loneliness she had carried after her husband's passing, and Luke shared how he had wandered from place to place, never finding a real home. The more they talked, the more Emma realized that Luke wasn't just a cowboy passing through her life. He had become someone who understood her silence, someone who brought peace into her days. He wasn't trying to replace her past. He simply respected it and stood beside it. Luke, too, felt something deep inside. He had spent years riding across towns and farms with no real destination. But sitting here, in this quiet kitchen with Emma, he felt something he had never experienced before, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Hours passed, but neither of them noticed. Time moved gently around them, as if giving them space to grow closer. Finally, Luke looked out the window and saw the moon high in the sky. "It's late," he said softly. "Should I go?" Emma looked at him, her expression tender. "Do you want to?" she asked gently. Luke shook his head. "No," he said honestly. "Then stay," she whispered, and that was all the answer needed. He didn't move closer suddenly or say anything dramatic. Instead, he sat back down, letting the simplicity of the moment speak for itself. Emma felt a calmness in her heart, something she had forgotten the feeling of. Outside, the night animals rustled lightly, and the soft wind brushed through the tall grass. Inside the house, two people sat quietly, no longer strangers. No longer lonely souls walking separate paths. They didn't make big promises. They didn't talk about the future in heavy words. Instead, they allowed the gentle connection growing between them to speak naturally. Luke stayed a little longer that night, sitting beside her while she talked about her dreams and fears. When she grew tired, he helped her place a blanket over her shoulders. When she smiled sleepily, he felt something warm spread inside his chest. Before he finally stepped outside to bring his horse closer to the farmhouse for the night, Emma touched his arm gently. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. Luke nodded. "Thank you for asking me to." She watched him through the window as he tied his horse near the fence. He looked up once, and their eyes met through the soft glow of the lantern. Emma felt a soft flutter in her heart, not a painful one, but the gentle beginning of something hopeful. That night, as she lay in her bed, she realized something important. The river had taken away her fear, but it had also brought someone unexpected into her life. Someone who didn't replace what she lost, but helped her rediscover what she still had: strength, hope, and the ability to feel safe again. Luke slept on the porch that night by his own choice, wanting to be close but respectful. And as he rested under the stars, he found peace he hadn't known for years. Their story didn't end that night. In fact, That night was only the beginning. The river had brought them together in a moment of danger, but their hearts had chosen to stay together in a moment of quiet truth. Sometimes life doesn't give loud signs. Sometimes it gives a gentle whisper. Emma whispered her truth. Luke stayed, and that was enough to change both their lives forever.